In the 1980s, Medellín was a city divided by two realities. One lived in the open, the other hidden in the shadows. By day, the streets carried the rhythm of life. Cars pushed through traffic. Children played football. Laughter spilled from market stalls. But beneath that ordinary surface, a second city thrived. A city ruled not by mayors or presidents, but by one man, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. They called him El Patron, the boss, the King of Medellín. He was born in poverty, yet rose to become one of the richest men alive. A man who built an empire not on steel or oil, but on white powder, cocaine. Escobar was the architect of a global network. Rivers of drugs flowed from the hills of Colombia into the veins of the United States and beyond. By his mid-30s, his wealth rivaled nations. He bought islands, airplanes, fleets of trucks, and ships. His home was more than a home. It was a fortress. Hacienda Naples, a sprawling estate with its own airstrip, swimming pools, and a private zoo where hippos and exotic animals roamed. It seemed as though Colombia itself had bent to his will. But wealth alone was not what made Escobar powerful. What made him untouchable was fear mixed with loyalty. To some, he was a savior, handing out cash to the poor, building houses, soccer fields, and schools. He was Robin Hood of the barrios. To others, he was death itself, a man who could smile at you in the morning and order your execution by nightfall. Pablo Escobar was two men in one, a father and a monster, a hero and a terror. And yet even the most feared man has one weakness: trust. Trust in the people he allowed closest to him, the ones who sat at his table, who broke bread with him, who raised their glasses and called him brother. Escobar's empire would not be destroyed by the enemies he knew, but by the friends he believed in. Escobar's circle was small, but dangerous. Each man bound to him by loyalty or by fear. Jorge Ochoa, one of the founding brothers of the Medellín Cartel. Calm, calculating, the businessman. Carlos Leder, flamboyant and reckless, obsessed with airplanes and cocaine. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano, brutal, merciless, a man whose violence shocked even killers. They laughed together. They spent fortunes together. They swore oaths that they would live and die for one another. Around Escobar's table, there were no outsiders, only men who shared blood on their hands and secrets in their hearts. But behind every laugh, behind every toast, lay another truth. The deeper the riches, the sharper the hunger. Loyalty could be bought, but it could also be sold. Escobar, in his pride, believed these men were his brothers. But history would show they were businessmen first, survivors above all else. When the storm came, some would sell their brother to save themselves. Subscribe for more interesting true crime stories. What made Escobar different from other drug lords was not just the size of his empire. It was his ambition. He wanted more than money, more than fear. He wanted legitimacy. In 1982, he was elected to the Colombian Congress, a man who, just years earlier, sold stolen cars, now shook hands with senators. He smiled for cameras. He spoke of progress. But power breeds enemies. The politicians who welcomed him soon recoiled when they saw the blood that stained his fortune. Journalists began to question him. Judges whispered about indictments. Rivals sharpened their knives. Escobar responded not with words, but with bullets and bombs. When persuasion failed, intimidation followed. When intimidation failed, murder filled the void. The people of Medellin called it plata o plomo, silver or lead, take the bribe or take the bullet, and most chose silver. Those who didn't rarely lived to tell their story. Escobar's wealth bought silence, but silence is fragile. And in the world of politics, betrayal is a language everyone understands. Even in his strongest days, Escobar felt it. The shadow of betrayal. It lingered in the quiet moments. When the laughter of his men grew too loud. When the politician shook his hand too quickly. When the phone rang in the night and silence followed on the other end. He trusted but never fully. He gave everything, yet prepared for nothing. For betrayal comes not from strangers. It comes from the hands that once carried your secrets, the mouths that once swore loyalty. And in Pablo Escobar's world, betrayal was not a matter of if, but when. The question was, who would be the first to trade his empire for survival? Who would whisper his name in the dark of a police station, or into the ear of an American agent? Who would turn brother into prey? The story of Escobar's fall is not the story of armies or governments. It is the story of betrayal, brick by brick, whisper by whisper, until the King of Medellín stood alone. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. The first betrayal did not roar. It whispered. It began with a man whose name history barely remembers. A soldier in Escobar's army. A man who once raised his glass at the Cartel's table. Who once swore his blood for the patron. Fear had eaten him alive. And in that fear, he saw only one escape. The police station. There, under the dim light, he began to talk. He spoke of routes, hidden airstrips, and stash houses. His voice low, his hands trembling. Each word bought his own survival. Each word carved another crack in Escobar's empire. The detectives leaned forward, hungry for every detail. Their pens raced across paper. The Americans listened in from afar. This man had eaten at Escobar's table, had carried out his orders, had lived in the glow of his wealth, and now he traded it all for one chance at life. Betrayal had entered the camp, and it would not leave. Once a door is opened, it can never be shut. Escobar, though he did not yet know it, was no longer surrounded by brothers, but by ghosts. Ghosts waiting to vanish at the first sign of danger. The whispers from Medellin reached Miami and Washington like smoke carried by the wind. The D had fought Escobar for years. They had watched billions of dollars of cocaine flood their cities. But now the tide was shifting. The Americans were no longer blind. They had ears inside his circle. Men who wore his gold by day, but confessed by night. Agents marked safe houses on maps. They traced the flight paths of cocaine-laden planes. They studied the streets of Medellin with the precision of surgeons. They knew which lieutenants were restless, which bodyguards were vulnerable, which politicians might be tempted by the right price. Each betrayal fed the Americans more than technology ever could. Each voice on the inside was worth more than 1,000 soldiers. Escobar did not yet realize it, but the men he feared least were the ones who would destroy him, not the presidents, not the armies, not even the D itself, but the traitors who spoke to them through the shadows. By 1991, the city Escobar once owned had turned into a prison. The barrio still whispered his name, but no longer shouted it with pride. Soldiers stalked the hills. Armored trucks blocked the streets. Helicopters cut the skies above Medellin like vultures searching for prey. Escobar moved constantly, never staying in one place too long. He disguised himself as a common man, changing cars, changing safe houses, at times even shaving his mustache. A king forced to live like a fugitive. Gone were the parades, the open laughter, the nights of champagne and music. In their place came silence, radios filled with static codes, late-night escapes through back alleys. Every door he passed could be a trap. Every ally could be an informant. The whispers had become louder and louder until Medellin itself seemed to speak against him. Escobar, the hunter, had become Escobar, the hunted, and his empire, built on fear, was beginning to tremble beneath him. Don't forget to subscribe. Inside the safe houses, the silence was louder than gunfire. His men, who once joked and celebrated, now sat stiff with fear. Their eyes darted, their voices lowered. Pablo Escobar could feel it. Betrayal was not just outside in the streets. It was sitting with him at the table. He studied their faces, the way one man avoided his stare, the way another's hands shook, the way conversations ended when he entered. He had built his empire on loyalty, but loyalty was bleeding out, and paranoia had taken its place. He carried his pistol everywhere, even among his most trusted lieutenants. He slept lightly, listening for footsteps in the dark. He ate quickly, watching the eyes that watched him. Escobar knew the truth. The empire was not falling because of bombs or bullets. It was falling because the bond of brotherhood had broken. Without trust, there is no empire. Without loyalty, there is no king. What remained was only a circle of men, each waiting for the moment to trade their silence for survival, each calculating if they would live longer with Escobar or without him, and that knowledge consumed him night after night. Subscribe for more interesting true crime stories. Out of the shadows came lost Pepes. They called themselves perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, the people persecuted by Escobar. But behind the mask of revenge was something far more dangerous. Los Pepes were not just victims. They were rival cartels, bitter enemies, and even men from Escobar's past. With the quiet blessing of Colombian authorities and whispers of American support, they hunted Escobar's allies with merciless precision. Day after day, the bodies piled up. Lawyers who defended Escobar were gunned down. Accountants who handled his fortune were executed. Families connected to him were slaughtered in the streets. Every corpse carried a message. Every spray of bullets was a warning. Escobar was no longer the predator. He was the prey, and the men who had once feared him now saw an opening. The tide had turned. His enemies were circling, and even those closest to him began to wonder if loyalty was worth dying for. The circle was tightening. The king was trapped. In the chaos, Escobar still clung to one thing: his family. He called them constantly, using stolen phones, moving from house to house, desperate to hear their voices. His wife begged him to surrender. His children asked when they could see him again. Each call risked exposure, but he could not let go. The man who once held Colombia in his grip was reduced to a father speaking in whispers, terrified that every word might be traced. Every call left a trail. Every signal gave his enemies more ground to hunt. The authorities knew it. The D knew it. Even his own men knew it. What Escobar could not accept was that the very love that made him human would become the thread that unraveled him. His family's safety, his family's presence, his family's voice. The walls were closing in, and with each call, they grew closer. December 2nd, 1993. The operation began swiftly. Soldiers and police poured into Medellin, guided by intelligence driven by certainty. Escobar had been located. Gunfire cracked through the streets. Neighbors hid behind windows. Children pressed their faces to the glass, watching history unfold outside their homes. Escobar fled, moving across the rooftops of his beloved city. The man who once commanded armies now ran alone, his breath heavy, his face drenched in sweat. Shots rang out. Tiles shattered beneath his feet. He raised his pistol, firing wildly, but the chase pressed on. On that rooftop, time seemed to freeze. A lifetime of power, of blood, of wealth, reduced to a desperate sprint under the Colombian sun. And then it ended. A bullet tore through him. Whether by his own hand or by the soldiers' rifles, the result was the same. Pablo Escobar, the King of Medellín, lay dead on a rooftop. His empire vanished in an instant. The photograph traveled across the world. Escobar's lifeless body stretched across the rooftop, surrounded by smiling soldiers. A symbol, a warning, a message that no empire of blood could last forever. In Medellín, the news spread like wildfire. Some cheered, believing the nightmare was finally over. Others wept, mourning the man who had given them homes, schools, and money when the government abandoned them. But beneath the noise was the truth. Escobar had not fallen to the power of the state alone. He had fallen to betrayal, to the whispers of his own men, to the guns of lost Pepes, to the wires tapped by the D. The men he trusted had traded his secrets for survival. The love he carried for his family had revealed his hiding place. The empire he built with fear was dismantled by fear itself. In the end, Pablo Escobar was not destroyed by his enemies. He was destroyed by those closest to him, by the very hands that once swore loyalty, by betrayal that began as a whisper and ended as a gunshot on a rooftop. And that is the true story of who betrayed Pablo Escobar. For more interesting true crime stories, subscribe to this channel.